What's the use? Roll it back, let it flow. Time's a wave, let it go. Chill up, let your heart fly free. Chill up, come and dance with me. Breathe in, let it spin, we're a galaxy. Clouds in my coffee, but I sip it just fine. Laughter's a melody that tingles with time. I'm a dream, I'm a stream, I'm a rhyme. Let it climb. Roll it back, feel the glow, catch the vibe, let it show. Chill up, let your heart fly free. Chill up, come and dance with me. Breathe in, let it spin, we're a galaxy. Feet on the ground, but my head's in the blue. Sunlight's a whisper, it's breaking right through. I'm a spark, I'm a flame, I'm a fuse. What's the use? Roll it back, let it flow. Time's a wave, let it go. Chill up, let your heart fly free. Chill up, come and dance with me. Breathe in, let it spin, we're a galaxy. Clouds in my coffee, but I sip it just fine. Laughter's a melody that tangles with time. I'm a dream, I'm a stream, I'm a rhyme. Let it climb. Roll it back, feel the glow, catch the vibe, let it show. Chill up, let your heart fly free. Chill up, come and dance with me. Breathe in, let it spin, spark, I'm a flame, I'm a fuse. What's the use? Roll it back, let it flow. Time's away, let it go. Chill up, let your heart fly free. Chill up, come and dance with me. Breathe in, let it spin, we're a galaxy. Clouds in my coffee, but I sip it just fine. Laughter's a melody that tingles with time. I'm a dream, I'm a stream, I'm a rhyme. Let it climb. Roll it back, feel the glow, catch the vibe, let it show.